As the ban on the waste paper export to the India has been lifted by the European Union, so what trends in OCC pricing do you see in coming time?
Well, from my point of view, or from the European point of view, you always have to balance various factors. So the main factor from my perspective is the very high freight rates. The ocean freight market is still disrupted, and we are seeing now freight rates from Europe into India which are like 3 times of what used to be in the pre-corona times. Of course, it will hardly be back to where it was, but once the freight rates are dropping, once the ocean freight market is getting back to what I would consider a new normal. Actually also the OCC prices, you're referring to the OCC prices in particular, will drop or may drop. We are seeing a huge demand, be it in Europe, be it in overseas, from our perspective overseas, which is India. And as I said, the major factor is the logistic cost. If I should make an educated guess, very difficult to guess in these times, I would see a drop maybe by end of the year. There's already light at the end of the tunnel. The question is just how long the tunnel is. As I said, if I should make a guess, by end of this year, latest beginning of next year, freight rates are supposed to drop, and as a result OCC prices in particular are dropping as well, in my opinion.
The World Packaging Organization has claimed that plastic has 7 times less impact in compared to paper. How do you see this claim outcome?
Well, actually we have the overall trend worldwide that, like if you take the plastic bags are being replaced by paper bags. Let me put it this way, from my perspective, meaning the paper perspective, of course I do appreciate the trend. On the one hand side, you're right, the energy costs are much higher for the production of paper versus plastic. On the other hand, if you have an outlook to, what happens to plastic, what happens to paper, from an environmental sound manner, maybe paper is the better solution.
How do you see the collection of recovered paper in India versus collection of recovered paper in Europe?
If I'm right, the collection rate overall Europe, the average rate is like 55%, if I'm correct. In Germany it's even up to 80%, versus India where it is just about 30%, 31 if I'm not mistaken. We have a different system in Europe as you're having in India. Of course, from the environmental point of view, it is wishful that also the collection rate in India is increasing. We have seen over the last years a high increase on the imports of recovered paper. I think 21 it was like 8.5 million tons, something like this. Of course, one of the reasons is that you're having a flourishing paper industry, which is very good, congratulations for that. On the other hand, the collection rate remains on a relatively low level. Of course, from an environmental point of view, it is wishful that actually the collection rate could be any higher, so maybe the system need to be adjusted somehow. Yeah.
European Union is going to regulate the exports of waste shipment going out of European boundaries. If this happens, then what situation will be faced by a developing country like India?
Referring to the OCC. So what is going now on in Europe and the European Union is the revision of the so-called waste shipment regulation. There is a draft at the European Commission at the moment, and what will come is certainly what is being called a broadly equivalent standard, which means that country overseas and also customer overseas, paper mill overseas, like in India, from the European point of view have to prove in a broadly equivalent standard to the recycling process in Europe. The devil is in the detail, so it's in the legislation process, which will be finished mid of next year, end of next year, and there will be a transition period which takes another like 3 years, so maybe by 2026 we will see the implementation of that new regulation. The devil is in the details, so no one can really say what it looks like. I would put an emphasis on broadly, which means that actually countries where like recovered paper is being shipped to have to give a kind of proof that they are actually having this broadly equivalent standard, plus that the paper mill itself, there will be some kind of an audit to prove that. We just don't know, as per today, how difficult it will be. Certainly it will be some kind of a trade obstacle. It's not a ban we're talking about, but you know, it will be not easy. If you compare that with the UK PRN system, for instance, it will not be that easy, but maybe at the end of the day it's just another either certificate what, you know, the paper mills in particular need to get. But as per today, no one can tell. Of course, everyone is concerned about that, and I would simply suggest that actually, you know, like the Indian Association, keeping a close contact, keeping an eye on that, of course, keeping a close contact, and you know, you're having friends in Europe, which is like the association I'm representing, which is ERPA, which is EuRIC, and I strongly suggest to have a, you know, close relationship, and to make sure that we're all on the same page. And once there's anything new, of course, we will inform the Indian associations accordingly. And keep
Okay.
Indian paper industry is dependent on European fiber, as India is one of their most selling outlets. Now it is the responsibility of European Union to ensure the long-term sustainability of the fiber. How does European Union see this fiber requirement of India in a sustainable manner?
India has turned into the major overseas market for the export of recovered paper. The thing is that in Europe, you know, we have a generation of 56 million tons of recovered paper overall. Out of that, 8 million tons are being exported. In between 2 and 3 million tons nowadays are being exported into India. You know, let me put it this way, it's a market at the end of the day. It's a market at the end of the day. So you may say that actually, you know, like the overseas market has to compete with the domestic market. At the same time, we have to keep in mind that recovered paper is something which is difficult to store for a longer period of time. So on the one hand side we're having the surplus, and even though new capacity is coming up in Europe as well, still being estimated 4, 5, maybe 6 million tons will still be being exported over the next years. And of course what you need to have is a good sustainable outlet overseas. So you're looking for a sustainable supply. We are looking as Europeans for a sustainable outlet, and we think that we have found that outlet in India, which is a very reliable and sustainable market. And since the paper industry in India is, as I said, flourishing and new capacities coming up, you know, we're looking forward actually in a long-term sustainable supply. And you know, also in the past, I remember that actually the first time I attended the PaperX was in 2002, which took place at the PaperX. So since 2002, from my point of view, you know, we have supplied, European material has been supplied to India. So we are long-term partners in that sense actually, and I'm very optimistic, since there will be also in the next years, even though there are new capacities coming up, there will be a surplus of recovered paper in Europe, and of course there need to be a reliable and sustainable outlet, which is India in the first place from my point of view.
Where do you see the Indian paper industry in next 10 years?
It's a very tricky question. It's a very tricky question. I would say that, you know, looking to India, I'm having like more than, I don't know, 400 paper mills in mind. I think what is crucial for India is also the export of their finished goods. India relies a lot on the domestic market, but I think to keep this growth continuously. I think it's important that actually Indian finished paper is even more exported than what it used to be. But I do see this. I do see an improvement of the quality, if I may put it that way, which is one condition that the material is being exported in large volumes. So when you're saying it's like 10 to 15, I do see these increase like over the next 5 years. And don't get me wrong, but to make an estimate for more than 5 years is a little bit unreasonable. I wished, of course, that it stays like that, but it's a bit difficult to say.
Is there any possibility for the Indian paper industry to make an association and procure the paper raw material at lower price by placing big order on European vendors? How do you see this move?
You mean the bigger volume is leading to... Not necessarily, to be frank. I mean, it's also a tricky and very smart question. But I would say it depends on the market, and it's not only about, when talking about like the overseas, the export. From our perspective, the export. It's not only India what we're having in the picture. It is also Southeast Asia, which is also a big market. So I know that. Let me put it this way. I know that the system in Europe what we're having is more based on long-term contracts, whereas in the overseas market it's more like a spot market in the sense that you would place orders on a monthly basis. Maybe the future, and I hope I try to answer your question, maybe in the future it would be possible, and this is also in the interest of the European vendors, that for recovered paper you rather have long-term contracts, be it a half year, be it a 3 months, be it like 10 months, be it even 1 year. It's a little tricky since, of course, when it comes to the overseas trade, you have to balance various factors. You have the ocean freight market, you have the exchange rate, this kind of thing. And what we're doing in Europe is that it's actually linked to an index, what we're having in Europe. But this is no rocket science at the end of the day. If there's some willingness at the Indian paper mill side, there's certainly some willingness at the European side. So I would say maybe it's about long-term contracts, and I find this possible. And if the demand is increasing, since as you said, you're seeing a growth of 10 to 15% in the Indian paper industry, then I would say that actually, if taking your question, making a proposal, I would also suggest that actually Indian paper mills may think of long-term contracts, be it 3 months, be it 6 months, maybe not 1 year, since some things are simply unpredictable, right? Maybe this is the key for a sustainable supply in future.
Any message for the Indian paper industry you want to give?
I'm glad to be here. It's fun. I wish you all the luck, since we're on the same boat here. So the better the Indian paper industry is doing, the paper mills are doing, actually the better for us. So I'm looking into a bright future. And thanks for being here.
Thank you.